The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Commander Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the flight deck, his weathered hands gripping the metal railing. The salt air mixed with jet fuel created a familiar scent that reminded him of countless missions, but today felt different. Today he wasn't preparing for another covert operation behind enemy lines. Instead, he faced perhaps his most challenging assignment yet. 3 weeks earlier, Admiral Richards had called him into his office with an unusual request. The Navy needed someone to lead a joint training exercise that would push the boundaries of traditional military cooperation. The mission required pairing elite Navy SEALs with fighter pilots for a series of coordinated strikes that had never been attempted before. The catch was finding pilots willing to work with ground forces in ways that defied conventional military doctrine. Jake had spent his entire career in the shadows, leading teams into situations where failure meant death and success meant silence. His reputation preceded him wherever he went within the special operations community. Fellow SEALs respected his tactical brilliance and unwavering dedication to bringing everyone home alive. His superiors trusted his judgment because he had never failed a mission in 15 years of active duty. But this assignment was different. It required him to step out of his comfort zone and work with aviators who lived by different rules and operated in a completely different environment. While SEALs moved silently through hostile territory, pilots soared above the battlefield with thunderous engines and explosive firepower. The two worlds rarely intersected, and when they did, communication often broke down due to fundamental differences in training and mindset. The briefing room had been packed with skeptical faces when Jake first presented the concept. Senior officers questioned whether such integration was even possible, let alone practical. Some argued that mixing special operations with air support was too risky, while others worried about compromising the effectiveness of both units. The debate had raged for hours, with Jake defending his vision against waves of criticism and doubt. Despite the resistance, Admiral Richards had given him the green light to proceed. The exercise would take place in 6 months, providing enough time to select personnel and develop new protocols. Jake knew that success would revolutionize how the Navy approached complex operations, while failure could end his career and set back special operations integration for decades. The selection process for SEALs had been straightforward. Jake chose operators he had worked with before, men whose skills and character he trusted completely. Each candidate possessed the flexibility and open-mindedness necessary to adapt their tactics for aerial coordination. They understood that this mission was about more than following orders. It was about pioneering a new form of warfare that could save countless lives in future conflicts. Finding the right pilots proved far more challenging. Most aviators were comfortable with their established roles and reluctant to deviate from proven methods. They had trained for years to excel in air-to-air combat and precision bombing, not to coordinate closely with ground forces in real-time situations. The idea of taking direction from SEALs during active operations seemed foreign and potentially dangerous to many experienced pilots. Jake had interviewed dozens of candidates over the past 2 weeks, each meeting revealing the same pattern. Pilots would express initial interest, then withdraw once they understood the full scope of the collaboration required. Some were concerned about compromising their aircraft safety, while others simply couldn't envision working so closely with ground personnel. A few were honest enough to admit they didn't trust SEALs to make decisions that affected aerial operations. The rejection had begun to wear on Jake's confidence. He had overcome impossible odds in hostile territory, but convincing his own military colleagues to embrace innovation seemed more difficult than any combat mission he had faced. Each failed interview brought him closer to the possibility that his vision might be too ambitious for the current military structure. Standing on the flight deck that morning, Jake watched as another group of jets prepared for routine training exercises. The pilots moved with practiced efficiency, their communication crisp and professional as they conducted pre-flight checks. He envied their certainty and wished he could find just one aviator willing to share his vision for the future of military cooperation. His phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Richards, requesting an update on the pilot selection process. Jake knew he couldn't delay much longer without risking the entire project. The SEALs he had chosen were already beginning specialized training, adapting their techniques for aerial coordination. They trusted him to find the right pilots to complete their team, and he refused to let them down. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts, but Jake didn't turn around immediately. He had grown accustomed to junior officers seeking his guidance or colleagues offering unsolicited advice about his recruitment challenges. Most conversations followed the same pattern, with well-meaning individuals suggesting pilots who had already declined or recommending changes to the mission parameters that would compromise its effectiveness. As the footsteps stopped beside him, Jake finally looked to see who had joined him at the railing. He expected to find another officer ready to discuss the weather or share opinions about his project. Instead, he found himself face to face with a young woman in a flight suit. Her dark hair pulled back in regulation style and her eyes focused intently on the activity below. She didn't speak immediately, and Jake appreciated the silence. Too many people felt compelled to fill quiet moments with meaningless chatter. But this pilot seemed content to observe and think. Her presence felt different from the other aviators he had met, though he couldn't immediately identify what set her apart. The woman's posture suggested confidence without arrogance, and her attention to the flight operations indicated genuine professional interest, rather than casual observation. Jake found himself studying her profile, noting the small details that often revealed character. Her hands remained steady on the railing despite the morning breeze, and her breathing appeared calm and controlled. After several minutes of shared silence, Jake realized this might be another opportunity to discuss his project with a potential candidate. However, something about her demeanor suggested she already knew why he was there and what he was looking for. The question was whether she would prove to be just another disappointment, or finally provide the breakthrough he desperately needed. The silence stretched between them as Lieutenant Sarah Chen continued watching the flight operations below. Jake had learned to read people quickly during his years in special operations, and something about this pilot intrigued him. While other aviators had approached him with either excessive enthusiasm or obvious reluctance, she seemed genuinely focused on the aircraft and their movements rather than making an impression. Jake decided to break the quiet with a simple observation. "Beautiful morning for flying," he said, testing her response. Most pilots would immediately launch into discussions about weather conditions, aircraft performance, or their latest training exercises. Sarah simply nodded and continued her careful observation of the deck crew's activities. Her restraint impressed him more than any lengthy conversation could have. In his experience, people who spoke less often had more valuable insights when they finally chose to share their thoughts. The best SEALs possessed this same quality, understanding that observation and patience frequently yielded better results than immediate action. After another few minutes, Sarah finally spoke. "You're Commander Morrison," she said without turning to look at him. "The one looking for pilots willing to work with SEALs on that joint operation everyone's talking about." Her voice carried no judgment or expectation, simply stating facts as she understood them. Jake nodded, curious about how much she actually knew about his project. Military bases thrived on gossip and speculation, often distorting the truth until original facts became unrecognizable. "Word travels fast around here," he replied, wondering what version of his story had reached her ears. "Not just fast," Sarah said, finally turning to face him. "Also wildly inaccurate in most cases. From what I've heard, you're either planning to revolutionize modern warfare or attempting career suicide, depending on who's telling the story." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth, suggesting she found the rumors more amusing than concerning. This response encouraged Jake more than any of the formal presentations he had endured from other candidates. Sarah's ability to see through the base gossip and maintain perspective demonstrated the kind of clear thinking he needed for this mission. "What do you think?" he asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "I think most people are afraid of change, especially when it challenges everything they've learned about their job. Pilots train to operate independently, making split-second decisions without consulting ground forces. SEALs work in small teams where everyone knows each other's capabilities and limitations. Combining those approaches requires both sides to give up some control, which makes everyone uncomfortable." Her analysis impressed Jake with its accuracy and insight. Most of the pilots he had interviewed focused on technical challenges or equipment limitations, missing the fundamental human element that would determine success or failure. Sarah had identified the core issue that needed to be addressed before any training could begin. "You've given this some thought," Jake observed, hoping to encourage her to continue sharing her perspective. He had learned that the best recruits often revealed their suitability through casual conversation rather than formal interviews. I've been following the project since Admiral Richards first mentioned it, Sarah admitted. My squadron commander thinks it's impossible, and most of the other pilots agree with him. They believe the coordination requirements would create more problems than they solve. She paused, watching another aircraft taxi into position for takeoff. Jake waited for her to continue, sensing she had more to say. Experience had taught him that rushing people often prevented them from sharing their most important thoughts. Sarah seemed to be weighing her next words carefully, perhaps deciding how much she wanted to reveal about her own interests. But they're wrong, Sarah said finally. The problem isn't coordination complexity. It's ego and territory protection. Both SEALs and pilots are used to being the experts in their field, and nobody wants to admit they might need help from someone trained differently. The technical challenges can be solved with proper communication protocols and shared training exercises. This perspective excited Jake because it suggested Sarah understood both the obstacles and potential solutions. Most candidates either dismiss the challenges as insurmountable or minimize them as simple technical issues. Sarah recognized the human dynamics while maintaining confidence that practical solutions existed. Have you ever worked closely with ground forces? Jake asked, beginning to see this conversation as a potential recruitment opportunity rather than casual deckside chat. Sarah's insight suggested she possessed the flexibility and strategic thinking his project required. Not officially, Sarah replied, but I've spent time studying close air support missions and talking to pilots who have worked with forward controllers. I also grew up around military personnel and learned early that different branches have valuable skills that complement each other when properly coordinated. Jake found himself increasingly interested in Sarah's background and perspective. Her willingness to study outside her primary area of expertise demonstrated the intellectual curiosity essential for adapting to new operational concepts. Many experienced pilots became too specialized to embrace different approaches, but Sarah seemed to maintain broader interests. What made you interested in close air support? Jake asked, hoping to understand her motivations better. Pilots usually gravitated toward air superiority, missions or precision bombing, rather than the complex coordination required for ground support operations. Sarah's expression grew more serious as she considered her response. I joined the Navy to make a difference, not just to fly expensive aircraft and training exercises. Close air support saves lives and changes outcomes in ways that air-to-air combat rarely can. When ground forces are in trouble, the pilot who shows up might be the only thing standing between them and disaster. This answer revealed the kind of mission-focused mindset Jake needed for his project. Too many military personnel became caught up in the prestige or excitement of their roles without maintaining focus on the larger purpose. Sarah's commitment to meaningful impact suggested she would embrace the challenges of joint operations. The conversation was interrupted by the roar of jet engines as another flight prepared for departure. Jake and Sarah watched in companionable silence as the aircraft moved through their pre-flight procedures with practiced efficiency. The sight reminded Jake of the precision and professionalism required for his proposed joint operations to succeed. When the noise subsided, Sarah spoke again. Commander, I know you've been interviewing pilots for weeks without finding the right candidates. If you're still looking for someone willing to take on this challenge, I'd like to volunteer. Her tone was calm and confident, without the false bravado or nervous energy that had characterized other candidates. Jake studied her face, looking for signs of uncertainty or hidden reservations. Instead, he found steady determination and genuine enthusiasm for the mission. After weeks of disappointment and rejection, Sarah's straightforward offer felt almost too good to be true. Why? Jake asked simply, wanting to understand her motivations before making any commitments. The wrong reasons for volunteering could create problems later, even with qualified candidates. Sarah met his gaze directly. Because someone needs to prove this can work, and I believe I have the skills and attitude to succeed. More importantly, I think this kind of integration could save lives in future operations, and that's worth the risk to my career. Jake spent the next 3 days conducting a thorough background check on Lieutenant Sarah Chen, diving deep into her service record and speaking with everyone who had worked with her. What he discovered exceeded even his optimistic expectations from their flight deck conversation. Sarah had graduated second in her class from the Naval Academy, distinguishing herself not just academically, but as someone who brought out the best in her peers. Her instructors consistently noted her ability to remain calm under pressure and her talent for solving complex problems through innovative approaches. Unlike many high-achieving students who focused solely on personal success, Sarah had regularly tutored struggling classmates and organized study groups that improved overall squadron performance. Her flight training records painted the picture of a natural aviator who combined technical precision with strategic thinking. Instructors praised her situational awareness and decision-making abilities, particularly during emergency scenarios where split-second choices determined outcomes. More importantly for Jake's purposes, Sarah had consistently volunteered for the most challenging training exercises, actively seeking opportunities to expand her capabilities beyond basic requirements. Commander Patricia Wells, Sarah's current squadron leader, provided perhaps the most revealing insights during Jake's interview. "Jen is the pilot I'd want covering my back in any situation," Wells had said without hesitation. "She doesn't just follow orders. She anticipates needs and adapts her approach based on changing circumstances. Most pilots excel at executing predetermined flight plans. But Sarah thrives when everything goes wrong and creative solutions become necessary." This adaptability was exactly what Jake needed for his joint operations concept. Traditional military training emphasized following established procedures and protocols, which worked well in predictable situations, but could become limitations when facing unexpected challenges. Sarah's demonstrated ability to think beyond conventional approaches suggested she could handle the fluid dynamics of coordinating with ground forces in real time. Jake also discovered that Sarah had spent considerable personal time studying military history and tactical innovations. Her personal library included books on special operations, joint warfare concepts, and case studies of successful military cooperation between different branches. This intellectual curiosity indicated a genuine passion for understanding warfare beyond her immediate responsibilities as a pilot. The most significant revelation came from Captain Rodriguez, who had served as Sarah's mentor during her early assignments. "Chen has something special that goes beyond technical skills," Rodriguez explained. "She understands that military effectiveness comes from people working together toward common goals, not from individual heroics or branch rivalries. I've never seen a young officer with such natural instincts for building bridges between different military cultures." This insight confirmed Jake's growing conviction that Sarah might be the breakthrough he needed. Successful joint operations required more than just tactical coordination. They demanded leaders who could forge genuine partnerships across traditional military boundaries. Sarah's track record suggested she possessed both the technical competence and interpersonal skills necessary for such challenging work. Armed with this information, Jake scheduled a formal interview with Sarah in his office, away from the casual atmosphere of their flight deck encounter. He wanted to explore her understanding of the specific challenges they would face and gauge her commitment when presented with the full scope of the project's demands. Sarah arrived precisely on time, dressed in crisp utilities and carrying a folder of materials she had prepared for the meeting. Jake appreciated this level of preparation, as it demonstrated respect for the process and serious intent regarding the opportunity. Too many candidates had treated their interviews casually, assuming their flying credentials alone would suffice. "Lieutenant Chen," Jake began after she was seated, "I've reviewed your service record and spoken with your superiors. Your qualifications are impressive, but I need to understand whether you fully comprehend what this assignment would require." He leaned forward slightly, studying her reaction to his serious tone. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I understand that success would require abandoning many conventional approaches to both flight operations and ground support. The pilots selected for this program would need to develop new communication protocols, learn to interpret tactical situations from a ground perspective, and trust SEAL team leaders to make decisions that affect aircraft safety and mission success." Her response demonstrated a clear grasp of the fundamental challenges, but Jake wanted to push deeper. "That's the operational side," he acknowledged. "But there are also career implications to consider. If this program fails, everyone involved will likely face negative consequences. Your flying career could be seriously damaged by association with an unsuccessful experimental program." Sarah nodded thoughtfully before responding. Commander, every significant advance in military capability has required someone to take risks that more cautious individuals avoided. The pilots who first developed carrier landing techniques, the officers who pioneered night operations, the aviators who created modern air-to-air combat doctrine, they all faced similar career uncertainties when they chose innovation over safe conventional approaches. Jake found himself impressed by her historical perspective and willingness to accept professional risks for potential larger benefits. This attitude contrasted sharply with other candidates who had focused primarily on protecting their advancement opportunities rather than contributing to military progress. Tell me about a time when you had to work closely with personnel from other military branches or specialties, Jake requested, hoping to assess her actual experience with the kind of cooperation his program would require. Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Last year, our squadron participated in a joint exercise with Marine Corps units conducting amphibious assault training. Initially, there was significant tension between the pilots and ground commanders because we operated on different communication frequencies and used incompatible tactical terminology. She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. I volunteered to serve as liaison between the air and ground components, spending 3 days embedded with the Marine units to understand their procedures and objectives. By learning their perspective and translating between different military languages, we were able to develop coordination protocols that improved mission effectiveness by over 40%. This example perfectly illustrated the kind of bridge-building capability Jake needed for his program. Most military personnel remained within their specialty areas, but Sarah had demonstrated willingness to cross boundaries and learn from other perspectives. Her success in improving joint operations through personal initiative suggested she could handle even more challenging integration requirements. What do you see as the biggest obstacle to successful SEAL pilot cooperation? Jake asked, testing her understanding of the interpersonal dynamics that would determine program success or failure. Trust, Sarah replied immediately. SEALs are accustomed to operating with teammates whose capabilities and limitations they know intimately. Pilots typically make independent decisions based on their assessment of tactical situations. Building the mutual confidence necessary for effective coordination will require both sides to demonstrate competence and reliability repeatedly until trust becomes automatic rather than tentative. Jake realized that Sarah had identified the core issue that would make or break the entire program. Technical problems could be solved through training and equipment modifications, but trust required time, shared experiences, and consistent performance under pressure. Her recognition of this fundamental challenge indicated sophisticated understanding of military psychology and team dynamics. The interview continued for another hour, with Jake exploring Sarah's thoughts on training protocols, communication procedures, and integration strategies. Each response reinforced his growing conviction that she possessed the rare combination of technical skill, strategic insight, and interpersonal awareness necessary for pioneering this new form of military cooperation. As the interview concluded, Jake made his decision. Lieutenant Chen, I'd like to offer you a position in this program, with the understanding that you'll be helping to create something entirely new rather than following established procedures. Sarah's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Sir, I accept. When do we begin? The first training session took place in a sterile classroom at the Naval Air Station, with Sarah sitting across from 6 battle-hardened SEALs, who studied her with barely concealed skepticism. Jake watched from the corner as his carefully selected team members evaluated their new partner, knowing that first impressions would significantly influence the program's trajectory. Master Chief Petty Officer Tom Rodriguez had 22 years of special operations experience and had initially opposed including any pilots in advanced SEAL training. His weathered face showed no emotion as he examined Sarah, but Jake recognized the subtle signs of professional assessment in his posture and attention to detail. Rodriguez's approval would be crucial for gaining acceptance from the other team members. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson, the team's communications specialist, appeared more openly curious about Sarah's presence. Johnson had expressed cautious optimism about the joint program during private discussions with Jake, believing that better coordination with air support could enhance mission effectiveness. His technical background made him more receptive to innovations that promised tactical advantages. The remaining 4 SEALs, Thompson, Garcia, Mitchell, and Barnes, represented the core of Jake's most trusted operators. Each possessed different specializations and personalities, but all shared the uncompromising standards that defined elite special operations personnel. Their acceptance of Sarah would require demonstrated competence rather than theoretical credentials or good intentions. Jake began the session by outlining the training program's objectives and timeline. Over the next 8 weeks, Sarah would participate in modified SEAL exercises designed to teach her ground operations perspectives, while the SEALs would learn flight operations basics to understand aviation capabilities and limitations. The goal was building mutual comprehension rather than cross-training team members in each other's specialties. Lieutenant Chen, Jake addressed Sarah directly. These gentlemen have agreed to share their expertise with you, but they expect the same professional standards they demand from each other. There are no participation trophies in this program, and your pilot credentials won't excuse substandard performance in any training exercise. Sarah nodded seriously. Understood, sir. I'm here to learn and contribute, not to receive special treatment because I'm from a different branch. Her voice carried conviction without defensiveness, striking the right tone for establishing credibility with skeptical teammates. Rodriguez spoke for the first time since entering the room. Ma'am, with respect, we've seen plenty of other branch personnel who talked a good game until things got difficult. What makes you think you can handle training that breaks down plenty of experienced operators? His question was direct but not hostile, representing the kind of challenge Sarah would face throughout the program. Master Chief, I don't know if I can handle everything you'll throw at me, Sarah replied honestly, but I know I won't quit, and I'll learn from every mistake until I meet your standards. I'm not here to prove that pilots are tough. I'm here to become good enough at understanding your world that we can work together effectively when lives depend on it. This response clearly impressed the SEALs, who valued honesty and determination over false bravado. Jake saw several subtle nods of approval and knew that Sarah had passed her first test by acknowledging her limitations, while demonstrating appropriate commitment to overcoming them. The first practical exercise involved basic land navigation using map and compass in unfamiliar terrain. While Sarah possessed excellent navigational skills from her flight training, ground-based navigation presented different challenges and required different techniques. Jake watched as she struggled initially with terrain association and pace counting, but gradually adapted her approach based on guidance from team members. Thompson, the team's reconnaissance specialist, worked closely with Sarah during the navigation exercise. Your problem is thinking too much like a pilot, he explained patiently. Up there you've got instruments and GPS to tell you exactly where you are. Down here you need to read the ground and trust your instincts more than your calculations. Sarah listened intently and began adjusting her methods based on Thompson's advice. Instead of relying heavily on precise measurements and mathematical calculations, she started paying more attention to natural landmarks and terrain features. Her progress was evident as the day continued, with her navigation accuracy improving significantly through applied feedback. The physical training component proved more challenging for Sarah, whose fitness regimen had focused on pilot requirements rather than the demanding strength and endurance standards expected of SEALs. During the first week, she struggled to complete obstacle courses and lengthy runs that team members handled routinely. Garcia, the team's medic, became an unexpected ally in helping Sarah improve her physical capabilities. Listen, Lieutenant, he said after a particularly grueling training session. You don't need to match our performance levels in every physical category, but you do need to develop the endurance to keep up during long operations and the strength to handle your own gear without slowing us down. This practical approach to physical training made more sense to Sarah than attempting to match the SEAL's specialized capabilities. She focused on building functional fitness that would support her role in joint operations rather than pursuing unrealistic performance targets. Her steady improvement earned respect from team members who appreciated her realistic assessment of requirements. The weapons training sessions revealed interesting dynamics between Sarah's piloting background and ground combat skills. While she possessed excellent marksmanship abilities developed through aviation training, her understanding of small unit tactics and close quarters combat was limited. Johnson took the lead in helping her develop these skills, appreciating her quick learning ability and attention to detail. "You've got good trigger control and target acquisition," Johnson observed during a training exercise, "but you're thinking about engagements as individual duels instead of team actions. In ground operations, your shooting is part of a coordinated effort where timing and positioning matter as much as accuracy." Sarah worked hard to integrate Johnson's tactical insights with her existing marksmanship skills, gradually developing a more comprehensive understanding of ground combat dynamics. Her aviation experience provided useful perspectives on situational awareness and threat assessment, even though the specific applications differed from flight operations. The most significant breakthrough came during the third week, when Sarah participated in a simulated rescue mission. The scenario required her to coordinate air support while embedded with the SEAL team, using her pilot knowledge to optimize aircraft employment while understanding ground tactical requirements from a personal perspective. Initially, the exercise went poorly because Sarah tried to direct air support based on theoretical knowledge rather than the actual tactical situation. Rodriguez stopped the simulation and provided frank feedback about her performance. "Lieutenant, you're trying to fly the mission from the ground instead of helping us communicate with the aircraft effectively. We need you to translate what we need into language the pilots can understand and execute." This guidance helped Sarah understand her actual role in joint operations more clearly. Rather than becoming a ground-based pilot, she needed to serve as an interpreter between two different military cultures and operational approaches. Once she grasped this concept, her performance improved dramatically, and the team began functioning as an integrated unit. By the end of the fourth week, subtle but significant changes were evident in team dynamics. The SEALs had begun treating Sarah as a valued team member, rather than an outsider being evaluated for potential usefulness. Her contributions to mission planning sessions were welcomed, and her insights about aviation capabilities influenced tactical decision-making in positive ways. Sarah's transformation was equally remarkable. Her understanding of ground operations had deepened considerably, and she had developed genuine appreciation for the challenges and skills required for special operations success. More importantly, she had earned the respect of operators whose approval was notoriously difficult to achieve. The halfway point of training brought an unexpected challenge that would test everything Sarah had learned about working with special operations personnel. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target had been located in a hostile region, and Admiral Richards decided to accelerate the program timeline by conducting a live mission rather than continuing with simulated exercises. Jake received the briefing at 500 hours on a Tuesday morning, learning that terrorist leader Hassan al-Mansouri had been tracked to a compound in a mountainous region where conventional airstrikes would be ineffective due to civilian proximity and complex terrain features. The mission required precision that only coordinated ground and air operations could achieve, making it perfect for testing the joint program's capabilities under real-world conditions. The intelligence package revealed significant complications that would challenge even experienced operators. The target compound was situated in a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges that limited aircraft approach angles and created communication dead zones. Local air defenses included portable surface-to-air missiles that could threaten low-flying aircraft, while ground approaches were heavily monitored by enemy sentries and electronic surveillance systems. Sarah studied the mission details with growing appreciation for the tactical complexity involved. Her aviation background helped her understand the flight challenges, but her recent training with the SEALs allowed her to recognize the ground operation difficulties that would have been invisible to her just 2 months earlier. The integration of perspectives she had developed through cross-training would be essential for mission success. The planning session took place in a secure briefing room with detailed satellite imagery covering every wall and advanced communication, equipment connecting the team to higher headquarters, and supporting units. Jake outlined the basic mission concept while team members analyzed specific aspects of the operation according to their individual specializations and responsibilities. Rodriguez examined the ground approaches and identified optimal insertion points that would provide concealment during the team's movement to the target area. His experience with similar terrain helped him anticipate challenges and develop contingency plans for various scenarios that might develop during the operation. Johnson focused on communication requirements and coordination protocols, recognizing that the mountainous terrain would create significant challenges for maintaining contact between ground and air elements. His technical expertise would be crucial for ensuring reliable communication throughout the mission's most critical phases. Sarah's role involved analyzing aviation support options and developing procedures for coordinating airstrikes in the challenging environment. Her unique perspective, combining pilot knowledge with ground operations understanding, enabled her to identify solutions that purely aviation or ground-based planners might have missed. The target compound's layout presented particular challenges that required innovative approaches. Traditional air support would involve aircraft operating from safe distances and altitudes, but the precision required for this mission demanded much closer coordination between pilots and ground personnel. Sarah would need to guide aircraft into attack positions while embedded with the SEAL team, using her technical knowledge to optimize their effectiveness while maintaining her team's safety. Planning sessions continued for 3 days, with each iteration revealing new complications and requiring adjusted approaches. Sarah's contributions became increasingly valuable as her teammates recognized her ability to bridge the gap between aviation capabilities and ground tactical requirements. Her insights helped develop creative solutions that neither pure pilots nor pure SEALs could have conceived. Independently, the mission launch was scheduled for pre-dawn, hours when darkness would provide concealment for the team's insertion, but sufficient light for precision airstrikes. Sarah felt nervous excitement as she prepared her gear, knowing that this operation would validate or invalidate months of intensive training and preparation. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the team landing in a concealed position several kilometers from the target compound. Sarah adapted quickly to moving through difficult terrain while carrying a full combat load, her physical conditioning having improved significantly during the training program. The SEALs noted her ability to maintain pace and noise discipline throughout the approach march. As they neared the target area, Jake called a halt to review final coordination procedures and confirm communication protocols with supporting aircraft. Sarah checked her specialized radio equipment and verified connectivity with the fighter pilots orbiting at high altitude, waiting for instructions on target engagement. The compound came into view just after sunrise, revealing a complex of buildings surrounded by high walls and defensive positions, exactly matching the intelligence reports. Enemy sentries were visible at strategic locations, and electronic detection equipment created a sophisticated security perimeter that would challenge traditional infiltration methods. Rodriguez led the team through a carefully planned approach that avoided detection systems while positioning them for optimal observation of the target area. Sarah established communication with the orbiting aircraft and began the delicate process of coordinating air support with ground tactical requirements. The first challenge arose when initial reconnaissance revealed that the target had moved to a different building within the compound, requiring rapid adjustment of the planned strike pattern. Sarah's ability to understand both ground tactical needs and aviation constraints proved crucial for developing a modified approach that maintained mission effectiveness while ensuring team safety. Communication with the pilots required constant translation between different tactical languages and operational procedures. Sarah found herself serving as interpreter between Jake's ground-based requirements and the flight leader's aviation capabilities, ensuring that both sides understood timing, targeting, and coordination requirements clearly. The actual strike coordination proved even more complex than training exercises had indicated. Real-time changes in target location, shifting enemy positions, and evolving tactical situations required continuous adjustment of air support plans. Sarah's embedded position with the SEAL team provided her with ground perspective that proved invaluable for guiding aircraft into effective attack positions. When the strikes commenced, Sarah maintained communication with both the SEALs and the pilots throughout the engagement, providing real-time battle damage assessment and adjustment instructions. Her unique vantage point enabled her to coordinate follow-up attacks that maximized effectiveness while minimizing collateral damage risks. The mission's success exceeded all expectations, with the target eliminated and the team extracted without casualties or complications. More importantly for the joint program's future, the operation demonstrated that properly trained pilots and SEALs could achieve results impossible for either group working independently. During the post-mission debrief, Admiral Richards expressed satisfaction with the operation's outcomes and announced that the joint program would be expanded based on the demonstrated effectiveness of integrated operations. Sarah's performance had validated Jake's vision and proved that innovative approaches to military coordination could produce significant tactical advantages. The debriefing also revealed that Sarah's contributions had been essential for mission success in ways that purely conventional approaches could not have achieved. Her ability to understand both aviation and ground perspectives had enabled coordination that maximized the strengths of both capabilities while minimizing their individual limitations. Team members who had initially been skeptical about including pilots in special operations training now praised Sarah's contributions and advocated for expanding similar programs. Rodriguez, previously the most doubtful about joint operations, became one of the strongest supporters of integrated training approaches. Jake felt vindicated in his original vision and proud of Sarah's transformation from promising candidate to proven operator. Her success had not only validated the program's concepts but had also pioneered new approaches to military cooperation that could influence future operations across the entire military establishment. The success of the Al-Mansouri mission created unexpected ripple effects throughout the military hierarchy that neither Jake nor Sarah had anticipated. Within weeks of their return, requests for briefings poured in from various commands, defense contractors, and military academies seeking to understand how the joint program had achieved such remarkable results. Sarah found herself thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight as military leaders sought to understand her unique perspective on cross-service cooperation. The young lieutenant who had quietly volunteered for an experimental program now faced audiences of senior officers, defense analysts, and strategic planners eager to learn from her experiences. The first major presentation took place at the Pentagon, where Sarah addressed a room filled with colonels, captains, and civilian defense officials. Standing before the assembled leadership, she felt the weight of representing not just her own achievements but the entire concept of integrated military operations that Jake had pioneered. The key to successful joint operations isn't superior technology or revised doctrine, Sarah explained to the attentive audience. It's developing genuine understanding between different military cultures and building trust through shared experiences under pressure. Technical coordination can be taught in classrooms, but operational trust requires working together when failure means people don't come home. Her presentation emphasized the human elements that made joint operations effective, challenging the traditional military focus on equipment capabilities and procedural improvements. Many audience members had expected technical briefings about communication systems or tactical modifications, but Sarah's insights into interpersonal dynamics proved more valuable for understanding replicable success factors. Questions from senior officers revealed both genuine interest and institutional skepticism about expanding joint training programs. Some worried that cross-training would dilute specialized capabilities, while others questioned whether the resource investment required for integrated training could be justified for limited applications. General Patricia Hawkins, the Joint Chiefs representative, posed perhaps the most challenging question. Lieutenant Chen, how do we scale this approach beyond small experimental programs? The military trains thousands of personnel annually, and individual mentorship approaches that worked for your team may not be practical for larger numbers. Sarah had anticipated this concern and had spent considerable time developing her response. Ma'am, the program's success came from selecting personnel with appropriate attitudes and abilities, then providing them with intensive cross-exposure to different military perspectives. We don't need to cross-train everyone, but we do need to identify individuals with the potential for bridge building and give them opportunities to develop those capabilities. Her answer impressed the audience because it demonstrated strategic thinking beyond her immediate experiences. Rather than simply advocating for program expansion, Sarah had considered implementation challenges and developed realistic approaches for addressing them. The Pentagon briefing led to invitations for Sarah to speak at the Naval War College, the Air Force Academy, and several joint training conferences. Each presentation refined her understanding of the broader implications of her experiences and helped her articulate the principles that could guide future integration efforts. Meanwhile, Jake found himself dealing with pressure from multiple directions as various military branches sought to claim credit for the program's innovations or adapt its methods for their own purposes. The Army wanted to develop similar programs for integrating special forces with helicopter pilots, while the Air Force proposed expanding close air support training to include more extensive ground operations components. The attention created both opportunities and challenges for the original program. Additional funding became available for expanding training capabilities, but bureaucratic oversight increased significantly as higher headquarters sought to monitor and influence the program's development. Jake worried that institutional interference might compromise the flexible, innovative approaches that had made the program successful. Sarah's relationship with her original SEAL teammates remained strong despite her new responsibilities and visibility. Rodriguez, Johnson, and the others continued to treat her as a valued team member rather than a celebrity, providing grounding that helped her maintain perspective amid the swirling attention and expectations. During a quiet moment between briefings, Rodriguez offered Sarah advice that proved prophetic. "Lieutenant, you've become the face of something bigger than any of us expected. People are going to want to use your success to advance their own agendas, and some of them won't care about preserving what actually made the program work. Don't let them turn you into a symbol that loses touch with the real operators who make missions succeed." This guidance helped Sarah navigate the increasingly complex political landscape surrounding joint operations development. She learned to distinguish between genuine interest in improving military effectiveness and bureaucratic opportunism that sought to exploit her visibility for institutional advantage. The most significant development came when Admiral Richards announced that Sarah would be promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to establish a permanent joint training facility. The new position would involve designing curriculum, selecting personnel, and overseeing the expansion of integrated operations training across multiple military branches. Sarah felt both honored and overwhelmed by the responsibility. 6 months earlier, she had been a junior pilot seeking meaningful challenges. Now she was being asked to institutionalize innovations that could influence military training for decades. The scope of the opportunity excited her, but she worried about maintaining the personal connections and flexible approaches that had made the original program successful. Jake would continue, leading operational aspects of the joint program while Sarah focused on training, development, and institutional implementation. Their partnership had proven effective during the experimental phase, and military leadership wanted to preserve that dynamic while expanding their respective areas of responsibility. The promotion ceremony took place on the same flight deck where Sarah had first approached Jake months earlier. As Admiral Richards pinned the new rank insignia on her uniform, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The nervous pilot who had volunteered for an uncertain experimental program had become a recognized expert in military innovation and cross-service cooperation. Standing at attention while cameras documented the ceremony, Sarah noticed Jake watching from the crowd with obvious pride in her achievements. Their partnership had succeeded beyond either of their original expectations, proving that military effectiveness could be enhanced through innovative approaches to training and cooperation. The ceremony concluded with Sarah addressing the assembled personnel, many of whom were curious about the joint program and its implications for their own careers. Her remarks emphasized the opportunities available to those willing to challenge conventional approaches and seek innovative solutions to complex military problems. The future of military effectiveness will depend on our ability to work together across traditional boundaries, Sarah told the audience. The threats we face require integrated responses that combine the best capabilities from different services and specializations. Each of you has opportunities to contribute to that integration, whether through formal programs like ours or through daily choices to cooperate rather than compete with personnel from other backgrounds. Her words reflected the transformation that had occurred, not just in her own career, but in her understanding of military service and professional responsibility. The experience of working with SEALs had expanded her perspective beyond aviation to encompass broader concepts of military effectiveness and service to the nation. As the ceremony dispersed and personnel returned to their duties, Sarah remained on the flight deck for a few moments, watching aircraft operations that had once represented the extent of her military world Now she understood those operations as part of a much larger tapestry of military capabilities that could be woven together to achieve results impossible through independent action. 2 years after that first conversation on the flight deck, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood in the main briefing room of the newly constructed Joint Operations Training Center, watching the latest class of candidates complete their final exercise. The facility represented the culmination of everything she and Jake had learned about integrating different military capabilities. But more importantly, it embodied the principles of cooperation and innovation that had driven their original experimental program. The current class included 12 SEALs, 8 pilots from various services, 4 Marine reconnaissance specialists, and 6 Army Special Operations personnel. Unlike the early days when Sarah had been the only pilot working with Jake's SEAL team, the program now routinely graduated joint teams capable of complex integrated operations across multiple military branches. Sarah observed the exercise from the observation deck, noting how naturally the mixed teams coordinated their actions. A Navy pilot worked seamlessly with Army Rangers to coordinate helicopter insertion, while Air Force fighter pilots received targeting information from Marine spotters embedded with a SEAL reconnaissance element. The level of integration that had once seemed revolutionary now appeared routine to these young operators. Master Chief Rodriguez, now serving as the senior enlisted instructor at the facility, joined Sarah at the observation window. His initial skepticism about joint operations had long since transformed into evangelical support for integrated training, making him one of the program's most effective advocates with traditionally minded personnel. "Remember when you were struggling to keep up with basic land navigation?" Rodriguez asked with a grin, watching Sarah's reaction to the reminder of her difficult early training days. "Now you're running the whole show and teaching other people how to build bridges between services that barely talk to each other before this program existed." Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's perspective on how far both she and the program had evolved. The Master Chief's acceptance had been crucial during her initial training, and his continued support had helped establish credibility for the expanded program among skeptical special operations communities. The exercise concluded with a complex scenario that would have been impossible without the integrated training the participants had received. Enemy forces in a simulated urban environment were neutralized through coordinated ground assault and precision airstrikes, with real-time coordination preventing civilian casualties while achieving complete mission success. During the after-action review, Sarah listened as team leaders analyzed their performance and identified areas for improvement. The sophisticated level of tactical analysis impressed her, particularly because it seamlessly incorporated perspectives from all military branches rather than defaulting to single-service approaches. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, one of the pilot participants, raised an important question during the debrief. "Ma'am, how do we maintain these integration skills when we return to our regular units? Most of our colleagues haven't had this training, and standard operating procedures don't account for the coordination methods we've learned here." This challenge had become increasingly important as graduates dispersed throughout the military and attempted to apply their integrated training in conventional environments. Sarah had been working with senior leadership to address this concern through policy modifications and expanded training opportunities. That's exactly why we're developing advanced courses for senior personnel and working to modify existing training programs, Sarah explained. "You're not just learning new skills here. You're becoming advocates for cultural change that will gradually transform how the military approaches complex operations." Her response reflected lessons learned from 2 years of program expansion and institutional resistance. Sustainable change required more than training individual operators. It demanded systematic modifications to military culture and standard procedures. The afternoon brought Sarah's weekly meeting with Jake, who had been promoted to captain and now oversaw all special operations training programs. Their partnership had deepened over time, with each bringing different strengths to the continuing development of joint operations capabilities. Jake's office walls displayed photographs from successful missions conducted by program graduates, serving as tangible evidence of the practical benefits that integrated training provided. Each image represented lives saved and objectives achieved through coordination that previous generations of military personnel had considered impossible. "Admiral Martinez wants to see our proposal for the Pacific Theater expansion, Jake informed Sarah as she settled into the familiar chair across from his desk. Apparently, the Joint Chiefs are convinced that near-peer competition requires exactly the kind of integrated capabilities we've been developing. The Pacific expansion represented the program's biggest test yet, involving coordination between services from multiple allied nations rather than just different American military branches. Success would validate the principles Sarah and Jake had pioneered, while failure could undermine years of progress in joint operations development. Sarah had spent months developing the proposal, drawing on lessons learned from domestic programs while accounting for the additional complexities of international cooperation. The challenge excited her because it offered opportunities to apply integrated training, concepts on a scale that could influence global military cooperation. Their discussion was interrupted by a knock on the door, followed by the entrance of Admiral Patricia Richards, who had been promoted and now served as commander of all joint training programs. Her visit surprised both Sarah and Jake, as the Admiral typically scheduled formal meetings rather than making unannounced appearances. "I have news that I wanted to share personally," Admiral Richards announced with obvious satisfaction. "The Secretary of Defense has approved the Pacific expansion and authorized a new joint training center in Hawaii. More importantly, he's requested that you two lead the international coordination efforts." The announcement represented validation of everything Sarah and Jake had worked to achieve, but it also meant accepting responsibility for programs that could influence military cooperation across the entire Pacific region. The scope of the opportunity was both exhilarating and daunting. "The assignment would begin in 6 months," Admiral Richards continued, "giving you time to establish succession plans for current programs and prepare for the expanded mission. The success you've achieved here has caught attention at the highest levels of government, and there's strong support for applying these methods on a much larger scale." After Admiral Richards departed, Sarah and Jake sat quietly for several minutes, absorbing the implications of the new assignment. Their experimental program had grown from a desperate attempt to find innovative solutions into a model for military transformation that was being adopted internationally. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked, studying Sarah's expression for signs of uncertainty or concern about the expanded responsibilities they were being offered. Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. The nervous pilot who had volunteered for experimental training had been replaced by a confident officer capable of leading complex programs, but she retained enough humility to appreciate the challenges they would face. "I think about that morning when I found you on the flight deck," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "You were looking for one pilot willing to try something different, and I was looking for a way to make a real difference. Neither of us could have imagined it would lead to this, but somehow it feels like a natural progression of what we started." The conversation continued as they began planning the transition that would take them from successful program administrators to international leaders in military cooperation. The journey that had begun with a simple conversation between strangers had evolved into something that would influence military training for generations. As the day ended and they prepared to leave the office, Sarah took one last look at the photographs on Jake's wall. Each image represented not just mission success, but validation of the belief that military effectiveness could be enhanced through cooperation rather than competition between different services and specializations. Walking across the base toward their respective quarters, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her to this point. The quiet pilot who had approached a SEAL commander on a flight deck had become a recognized leader in military innovation. But more importantly, she had helped prove that individual initiative could drive institutional change when combined with persistence and principled leadership. The future held new challenges and opportunities, but Sarah faced them with confidence born from experience and success. The principles that had guided their original experimental program would continue to drive their work, regardless of the scale or complexity of the missions they undertook. The story that had begun with a search for one qualified pilot had become a testament to the power of innovation and cooperation in achieving objectives that conventional approaches could never accomplish.